Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us on a wonderful Melbourne Friday night. I have to apologise for starting a bit late. The live stream has been crashed by the thousands of Australian readers readers of The Australian who are desperate to be here with us to hear the many pearls of wisdom which are going to fall from Malcolm's lips this evening. But something's happened to the live stream. It's dead. But you are the important part of this audience, and the most important part of this audience. Everyone matters. And thank you for being here tonight. So look, we're going to have a great conversation this evening. I'm really, really looking forward to it. Firstly, let me acknowledge that we are on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and that our guest this evening comes from the Gadigal lands of the Eora Nation. One of the many things that I've learnt since I became an independent member of Parliament is the extent to which every member of Parliament is deeply attached to the electorate that they represent. And in reading a number of books about Malcolm in the last couple of months, I've been really struck by the extent to which so much of his career, and I think his personality and his achievements, derive very much from the community in which he grew up and the community in which he still lives. Malcolm Turnbull has been at the heart of Australia's political, economic and strategic debates for decades. He was born and raised in Sydney, then studied law at the University of Sydney and was working as a full-time journalist even at that stage, before he headed to Oxford as a Rhodes Scholar. His career before he went to politics was extraordinary. He was a very successful journalist, a barrister. His escapades with the likes of Kerry Packer and the British government in the Spycatcher case are legendary. And then he became a business leader who helped to build Aussie Mail. He served as a partner at Goldman Sachs before stepping into public life. And his contribution to our Parliament at a time when many people in his position might have perhaps been thinking about a quieter life was quite remarkable. As Prime Minister between 2015 and 2018, Malcolm led Australia through a period of great global uncertainty, which in some ways mimics the period of global uncertainty and doubt that we are seeing now. But he led a government that delivered some really big things for this country, things that we perhaps sometimes forget. Marriage equality, modernised school funding, and Snowy Hydro 2.0. He launched it, haven't quite got it yet, it's a matter of time. But bold steps and a commitment to a clean energy future and a renewable transition that we've lacked at times in the last 10 years, and we'll talk about that tonight. He's always been a strong advocate for intelligent government, for innovation and climate action and evidence-based policy. Again, things which we unfortunately lack in the national conversation much of the time. Tonight we're going to talk about energy, we're going to talk about climate resilience, we're going to talk about strategic autonomy, and we're going to talk about the health of our democracy. Please join me in giving a very warm welcome to the 29th Prime Minister of Australia, Malcolm Bligh Turnbull.
Very generous.
No, my pleasure. So Malcolm, we've had a number of people of great stature come to this hall in the last couple of years. Jackie Lambie, when she was here, I asked her not to teach my parents, who are in the front row, any new words.
Yeah.
But you're someone who loves a word.
I do.
A new word. I learnt a new one today.
What was that?
Aptronym.
Aptronym. What is
Aptronym. An aptronym is a word which sounds like it's a unonym. It's like nominative determinism. So saying that Andrew Hastie perhaps has been a bit quick to act in his steps in the last 6 months.
Yeah.
That's an aptronym, that he's named Hastie.
Oh, I see. Right. Okay.
Yeah, so
Okay.
You can have that one for free.
Right.
We'll come back to that in 90 minutes, and I'll give you time to think about a nice new word for me.
You know, it's such a pity that you never got to have a chat with Gough Whitlam. This is the conversation. He would have spent the whole night talking about words and etymologies and so forth. So, yeah.
Well, that's an interesting segue. So I'll segue from that. So yesterday you were in Canberra, and we
Yes.
unveiled your new portrait.
Yeah, I like to refer to it as a public hanging, yeah.
It's wonderful.
Oh, good.
But one of the things that people commented on was your hands in the portrait,
Yeah,
which I like this,
yeah,
which is how you would often speak in Parliament and in
Yes.
public life.
yes.
But
Normally holding my glasses, but anyway, yeah, they
Yes,
left that.
as you are.
Thank you, yeah.
But some people thought that there was a little bit of an echo of the Whitlam portrait in Parliament House.
Well, most portraits are because this is Jude Ray, the artist, only the second woman to have painted a portrait of a prime minister, actually, there's been quite a lot of prime ministers, but the first one in 50 years. But anyway, Jude told me that and it's true, when you look at most of the portraits of people either standing or mostly sitting, looking sort of still and, being still. And I probably, because I was such a fidgety subject, we both decided that it would be better if it showed me speaking. And the only other portrait that is an action portrait, I mean, I don't know why you'd call that. I would have thought an action portrait would be if the subject was on a horse waving a sabre or lassoing a wild beast or something. But anyway, the only other one is the one Clifton Pugh did of Gough Whitlam. Yeah, you're right.
Did you consider a horse and a sabre?
No, I didn't. No, and I didn't. Yes, I didn't know. No, I mean, Kevin Rudd had it. Kevin Rudd's picture has Kevin, of course, but it's got all these other things, including his cat. So we didn't go down that line either.
No. So we did bill this evening as being one around strategic autonomy and Australia's defence strategies, and we will get onto that. The idea this evening is we'll chat for about 45 minutes an hour, and then I have a number of questions which have been submitted by audience members, and we'll have at least a half an hour for those. But before we get onto that, can I just ask you were in the House yesterday. Parliament sat for the last time this year, this morning. It's been a bit of a week, a bit of a fortnight. We've seen the Nationals and then the Liberal Party drop net zero as a target. And the Albanese government this morning pushed through, with the support of the Greens, the first major environmental legislation this century. What's your take on the current state of politics, particularly with respect to energy policy from your side, the LNP? Well,
look, the coalition, and I said this yesterday, and I say it often, I mean, they have abandoned rationality, right? It's now all about culture wars. I used to say when I was in Parliament that energy policy should be determined by engineering and economics, not ideology and idiocy. And it has become more ideological and more idiotic on the coalition side of politics since. The abandonment of the net zero by 2050 is a culture war issue. I mean, let's be obvious. I mean, if you say we are going to achieve something by 2050, that is clearly a statement of intent, of values, of aspiration. I mean, all sorts of things will happen between now and 2050, but basically what you're saying is this is what I believe in. This is where we are doing our best to get to, okay? To walk away, and we didn't have a coalition when I led it, did not formally have a net zero by 2050 target. To be honest, it didn't occur to me. It just didn't occur to us. It certainly didn't occur to me because I assumed it was implicit in the Paris Agreement anyway. I mean, I think that's really what the Paris Agreement requires you to do. So Morrison adopted it in order to confirm that was the long-term goal. So to walk away from it is that, that is basically, that is sending a message to say, we do not believe in the clean energy transition, we do not believe in renewables, and as I said at the time, there is no amount of nuance or footnotes or provisos that is going to get away from that very clear message that is designed to say, basically to win the approbation of the Sky News After Dark crew, that we don't believe, we think, to quote Tony Abbott, climate change is crap. I mean, that's essentially where they are, and I think it's wrong. It's wrong from a moral point of view. It's wrong from an economic point of view, because the cheapest form of new generation is renewables, and it is also insane from a political point of view. But this is what happens when you get yourself, as they have done, into this little echo chamber of that sort of narrow entertainment ecosystem, and that's all you're talking to. And that, I guess that's why you're here. So.
So is there any way back for the, I don't want to say LNP, but I'm going to say NLP, because the Nationals seem to be driving the coalition's policy?
Well, yeah, I mean, the dynamic is that once your goal is to win the approval of, that sort of right-wing culture war ecosystem that I talked about, then you will always be drawn further and further to the populist right. And it is, and like the Queensland LNP, because in Queensland the Liberal Party and the National Party are one party, so it's called the Liberal National Party. They, in my experience, their main anxiety has always been not to be outflanked on the right by people like Hanson or Katter or Palmer when he was a force. But you now see this is happening to the coalition nationally, and that's why they have hardly any representation in cities. So yeah, I mean, it's madness. I mean, it is mad. You're the doctor. I mean, sure. There's one definition of madness, which is keep on doing the same thing, expecting a different result. And this was they saw where this got them in 2022. And then they doubled down and did even more of it in 25. And yet, if you, read The Australian or look at Sky News, which I try to avoid doing both, you'll find them saying, no, the problem was Peter Dutton wasn't right-wing enough. Peter Dutton was Labor light. Well, that's fine. I mean, okay. It's as though their goal is to, anyway, there it is. I mean, even Paul Kelly, who works for The Australian and writes for it, makes exactly the same point. He's the only columnist there that is obviously so senior they're not able to edit. So what I'm saying to you is not an insurgent or unorthodox or eccentric point of view.
We'll move on. Okay, thank you. So AUKUS.
Yeah, AUKUS. Yes.
Well, let's talk about AUKUS. You've described AUKUS as a terrible deal.
Yeah.
And you've warned that Australia could end up with no submarines, no sovereignty, and no security. The Colby Review, the 30-day Colby Review, was called in June. Yeah. And we still haven't seen it. Yeah. And some commentators, I think yourself and Paul Keating, have both suggested that it's potentially an opportunity for Australia if this US-led review of AUKUS finds that it's not in the American administration's best interest. Although $370 billion with no definite requirement to actually provide anything seems like a pretty good deal to me.
Well, it is. It's a fantastic deal for the Americans.
For them.
Yeah. I mean, Donald Trump will just be... People say, does Donald Trump like it? I mean, Donald Trump will just be thinking to himself, how could that sleepy old guy Biden do a deal as good as this? And how could anyone be as dumb as the Australians were to go along with it? And he'll be thinking to himself, can I get them to do another deal as bad as that? I mean, they've got Lee Donald to be saying, they've got lots of money, they've got all the iron ore and stuff, maybe I can fleece them again.
Well, as things are, it would be illegal for Donald Trump to hand over any of those submarines to us because he can't do something that detracts from the US's capacity, and they're not making enough submarines to meet their own needs.
Well, look, why don't I just recap it? So the AUKUS deal entered into in 2021 by Morrison. They cancelled a partnership with France. In doing so, lied to the French government. This caused an enormous rupture. I mean, the way Australia, and apart from Scott Morrison, I don't think there's anyone that really disagrees with what I'm about to say. The way Australia dealt with it was shameful. I mean, instead of being upfront and saying to France, look, we want a change of course and being honest and open about it, right up to the week before the AUKUS deal was announced and the cancellation of the French deal was announced, the Australian government was telling the French government that the French-Australian partnership was going ahead, was doing well, and was going to continue. Now, I'm not giving you gossip. This was all in writing, and this is all now public documents and produced to the Senate estimates and freedom of information requests. So the French were mightily upset. They recalled their ambassador. They recalled their ambassador from the United States. It was really bad because, trust is one of those things that takes a long time to build up in any context, but can be lost very quickly. But let's just put that aside. What's the deal? So the deal is that Australia was the idea was Australia to acquire naval nuclear propulsion ultimately from the UK. The problem is that the UK would not be able to, they haven't even designed their new nuclear submarine yet, right? So the earliest one could appear would be sometime in the early 2040s. And we've got a fleet of old submarines that should have all been retired by now. And so what were we going to do with this capability gap? And so the solution was to say, for the Americans to say, we will sell you 3, maybe 5, up to 5 Virginia-class submarines, which is they're what they call attack submarines. There are 2 types of nuclear submarines. There are SSNs, which are the attack submarines, that go around and chase other submarines and chase warships and so forth. And there are the SSBNs, the boomers, which are the ones that carry the nuclear ballistic missiles that are the deterrent. And the whole point about them was, and both, the Russians have them, the Americans have them, China has them, and the idea is that if all of your land-based capabilities and airfields and bombers were taken out in a first strike, you'd never be able to know where the nuclear boomer submarines were, so there'd always be at least one or maybe more of them that would be able to respond in a retaliatory strike. So that's nuclear madness, but that's how they came about. So the problem with the Virginias, as Monique just described, is that the United States is not building enough for their own purposes. They are about 20 short of what their Navy says they need. They need to be building 2 a year to replace retirements, and they're currently building at the rate of 1.3 a year. So they have to double their production, more than double their production rate to be able to spare any for Australia. So when this deal was being concluded, and this is by this time Albanese's in office, and he was foolish to go along with it, the American Congress legislated to say that no submarine could be sold to Australia unless the President certified at 270 days before the sale, among other things, that the sale would not detract from the underwater capabilities of the US Navy, or put another way, that they could spare them, which clearly they couldn't today. And it is common ground that there has to be a dramatic or transformational change in their shipbuilding to be able to spare them. Now, you mentioned Colby. Colby is a fellow called Elbridge Colby, or Bridge Colby, who's the number 3 at the Pentagon, who Lucy and I know well. He's a very smart young man, and he was very critical of the AUKUS deal before he joined the administration, and now he's being discreet and doing his job. But he was critical because he said, how on earth can America spare these? These are our most valuable strategic and survivable assets. How can we spare them? And so from the American point of view, we have this long-range deal with the Brits, which they would say, well, that's between you and the British. We'll contribute some technology, but that's your problem. In terms of the Virginias, they don't have any obligation to sell them to us unless they can spare them, and absent a dramatic change in submarine production in the US, they will not be able to spare them. We are giving them $3 billion in cash with no guarantees. We are providing a dockyard and a submarine base in Perth for them, for the US Navy, all at our expense. We have now currently about 150 of our best and brightest young naval officers serving on American nuclear submarines. And we may end up with no subs at all. And if and when we don't get any subs, we can't say, as I did to Donald Trump over the refugee deal, we're not going to be able to say, you can't renege on our deal, this is mean and unfair, because they're able to say, listen, you Australians went into this with open eyes. You took on this risk, we were transparent about it, and so, sorry, no subs for you. And so what we will very likely end up with is, at our expense, a naval base in Perth, a dockyard in Perth, billions of dollars paid to the US Navy, lots of bright young Australians serving on American nuclear submarines, and no submarines of our own. And so that's why I say it's a really unfair deal, it's a massive loss of sovereignty, and if we end up with no submarines of our own, a real diminution in security. So it's a shocking deal. And this is not, and look, Bridge Colby said more or less the same thing last year before he, entered the administration. I don't know what the review will say. I mean, from a cynical point of view, if the Americans are really cynical, they would just say, look, fine by us, you guys have taken on the risk, we're working hard, trying to build more subs, but you know what? If we can't, too bad. Our Navy comes first. And of course, politically, that's always going to be the case. So, this is the problem with bipartisanship, by the way. Everyone says bipartisanship is good. This is something Morrison went on to with no proper planning there was no policy analysis here. This was done in a little secret group. He was keen on that. He gave the Labor Party 24 hours notice to accept it. And they went along with it on less than 24 hours' notice with a shadow cabinet meeting with no papers, because they didn't want to be wedged on defence issues in the lead up to the election. So so this is the tragedy, that it is a terrible deal that has got bipartisan support. That doesn't mean it's good. That means it hasn't been scrutinised. So I'm sorry for being lengthy. There it is.
So on that, there is clearly a real problem with the politics of defence procurement, because there is this issue of being wedged if you're not seen to be tough enough on defence. Yeah. And we saw that last year with the arguments about whether or not we should be increasing our defence spending and to what extent. But in 2016, I think it was either 2016 or 2017, Linda Reynolds, as a member, I think she was your defence minister, floated
not mine, no. She was a defence minister under Morrison, but yeah, she was in the government.
Well, she floated an idea of giving over defence procurement and the responsibilities for that from parliamentary oversight to the military. There was, and it didn't get through, but there was this thought that the political side of things shouldn't be making those decisions, and that they should be handed over. It's not relevant now, but it does point to an issue, and I think there's an issue of an episode of Utopia, and I think you've talked about it as well, actually, where you see it as a politician, you ask for a briefing and about 10 blokes in very, very white uniforms with a lot of gold braid come in and they look at you and they basically pat you on the head and say, don't worry, little lady, we got it. And they don't... And politicians just sort of fawn at their feet.
Yeah, I think... well, some do. So I certainly didn't. But I think that there is a massive lack of scrutiny of defence. Right? There's a lot of problems with defence, a lot of cultural problems. They're very adverse to innovation. The American defence establishment, which would be 20 times the size of ours, I would think at least, is actually more agile and innovative than ours is. As you probably know, Lucy and I are very involved in venture capital and technology sector. So I see this directly. I can see it. I was a problem I was addressing when I was PM, but I can tell you, you'd need to be Prime Minister for 20 years to get this changed. It is really difficult to change the culture there. And they are very, very wedded to the American military-industrial complex, far too ready to buy American at any price, and it is, we're paying for it. Look, there is I think, Monique, one of the biggest problems is that there is insufficient scrutiny by the Parliament of, say, AUKUS. For example, the United States, everything you can find out about AUKUS, you find out through the US Congress. If you want to find out read the Congressional Research Services reports, comprehensive, that thick. The Congressional Budget Office, similar type of things. They're leading, figures. They're admirals like Admiral Caudle, the new Chief of Naval Operations, gave lengthy testimony about the problems with shipbuilding before the Senate Armed Services Committee in June. They're much more transparent. Our system is not transparent, and our Parliament's committees are not able to, provide the scrutiny we need. Now, with AUKUS in particular, with so little known about what's going on at our end, it's a real challenge. And as I understand, there's a move to have an AUKUS committee that is limited only to members of the Labor Party and the coalition. Which again defeats the whole purpose.
I think that the most recent update on that this week is that Richard Melser said he's not opposed to having an independent on the committee.
Oh, that's good.
But he won't be having any of those pesky Greens.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. It's interesting. The Greens can be pesky. I've had a bad experience with them myself in 2009. Although, anyway, it's important. It's important that there is better scrutiny.
Yeah, I think that does speak to the bipartisanship over this issue being very problematic. We've never debated AUKUS in the House. No. One of the reasons is the Liberal Party is all the way with DJT. They're not facing up publicly to any issues with it. No. It gets shut down as soon as the crossbench raise it. Yeah. People have tried in the Senate, and in fact David Shoebridge, who's the Greens Defence Foreign Affairs person in the Senate, is probably the person who's pushed it the hardest. Yeah. But it's an issue that we're not able to examine it to the extent that we can. And many of us have called for independent reviews of AUKUS by the Australian government in the same way that the UK government and the US administration are undertaking. And those calls have fallen on
well, the UK Parliament's got a parliamentary committee inquiring into it at the moment.
Yeah. So you've said that our reliance with the US can no longer be taken for granted, and obviously there's been a lot of geopolitical instability and uncertainty in recent years, particularly the America First approach from Donald Trump. What would you be, were you Prime Minister today, how would you try to hedge against that the US government's unpredictability while maintaining alliance, which does remain very important to us?
Well, carefully. We've got to be clear-eyed about it. The reality is that we are now in a might is right world. If you think about the world, say, since the Second World War, all of the big global institutions, the United Nations, so forth, were all set up with the purpose, sort of the stated purpose, of pushing back against might is right. So the UN Charter talks about respecting the sovereignty of all nations. It's all about ensuring that the big cannot do whatever they like. Now, of course, that's an aspiration that hasn't always been achieved, to say the least. But we're now and the United States has always at least said that's what their goal is. They haven't, you can say they haven't always performed in that way. But Donald Trump does not even pretend to believe in those values. His view of the world is not materially different to that of Vladimir Putin. He has more in common with Putin's view of the world than he does with any of his predecessors. And he does not make any bones about it. I'm not saying he's a hypocrite. I'm saying he is, on this matter at least, upfront and honest and frank about the way he sees the world. He believes that strength and power is what happens. He put on his Truth Social site not long ago, he said, my golden rule is he who has the most gold makes the rules. That's what he believes in. And so he is using every power he has, economic power, military power, to achieve what? Again, he's very honest about this, America first. What does that mean? To advantage the United States at the expense of others. At least the Chinese leadership talk about win-win. They're always saying we've got to have win-win deals. Donald Trump's idea of win is he wins, you lose. And again, he doesn't make any bones about it. So that's a world we've got to come to grips with. I think a lot of us, I had a conference in Canberra in March talking about this. It is something we have really got to come to grips with. Now, how does the government deal with it? Carefully. But we have to recognise that also that this is not a blip, okay? When Trump was first president, and that's when I was dealing with him, of course, he was a bit of a fluke. People felt he was a fluke winning the GOP nomination, and then nobody expected him to win the general election, least of all him. He won. He didn't control the Republican Party. He hadn't done any planning for becoming, for being president. There was no transition plan of any note. And so he had a lot of people working for him who, were good, mediocre and indifferent, whatever, but they were not all totally loyal to him. So he had good people like Defence Secretary James Mattis, for example. And they tried to constrain him. And I saw this first, up close. I saw this happening and particularly on economic issues. Now, Trump too is very different. He totally controls the Republican Party. He won the election, in every respect. He has an administration, the members of which were chosen principally on the basis of their loyalty to him, and there was a whole agenda planned beforehand, largely by the Heritage Foundation. This was the big plan that he said he didn't know anything about, but incidentally, maybe he didn't. Whatever. Anyway, it's all being put into place now, and so it's a very different United States. And I'm not saying they are. You're absolutely right, Monique. They are our ally. That alliance will endure. We hope, but we have to deal with it, recognising that we no longer share the same values. You see, we've never shared entirely the same interests as the United States. There have always been issues where, on trade issues, there always are issues where our interest is somewhat different to theirs. But we always felt we shared the same values. We absolutely do not share the same values today with the US. You could say we believe in democracy and the rule of law. Well, Donald Trump's view of democracy is not the same as ours. His view of the rule of law is absolutely not the same as ours. You've only got to look at what's happening there. Look at the way the administration is leaning into and seeking to influence the politics in other countries, supporting right-wing populists, if you like, Trump MAGA wannabes in European countries. I mean, how would you feel if you're a German and you've got the Alternative for Deutschland, the AfD, with all of its antecedents from the Nazis, and you've got the Vice President of the United States actually boosting them, and we've got Elon Musk coming over and speaking at their rallies. I mean, this is a very, very different environment. And so clearly maintaining our sovereignty, our autonomy, is more important than ever, which gets back to the issue I made with AUKUS. And I don't want to go on about it all night because you'll all flee with your ears bleeding with pain if I talk about AUKUS too much. But this is a time when we need to be more independent, more sovereign and more autonomous because of the times in which we're living. And yet, regrettably, in large part because of that deal, we've actually become more dependent. In other words, we have become more dependent on the United States at a time when the United States has become less dependable. And that is not a criticism of the United States. They make it very clear that they're less dependable. I mean, they're saying, you can't rely on us anymore. That's the message to their allies. So, wild times. You should be the foreign minister, you see.
Please God, no. What about, we've talked about the States a bit. We could get on to China. You have also warned about China and specifically about a coercive China and spoken about the importance of us trying to maintain a rules-based order. How do middle powers do that? Middle powers like Australia in this region do that without escalating tensions?
Well, I mean, the bully will always say, "Don't escalate tensions. Just do as you're told." Right? So that's really bad. You don't want to do that. I mean, yes, China has exercised economic coercion against Australia, but now we see the United States doing the same thing. This is, I mean, look all around the world. I mean, not just, I mean, the coercion towards Australia has been very modest, but internationally, again, we're all very familiar with the news, so you can see all the examples. This is what I mean. We're now in a situation where we've got these superpowers that are behaving in very similar ways. And how do we deal with that? Well, you have to stand up to it. The one thing I've learnt in all my life, and I've learnt it in politics and geopolitics, is if you give in to bullies, you just end up with more bullying. So you cannot take a backward step. What you have to do is work with others. Middle powers should work together, Monique. We should reckon, and that's happening. And we should. So those of us nations that believe in free trade, believe in the rule of law, should work together. And you can see that happening now. So we are very likely to get a free trade deal with the European Union. I mean, that was moving along, reasonably well until the AUKUS decision, and then it was just, that blew it out of the water. The French just said, we do not want to have anything to do with the Australians, and our poor ambassador in Paris couldn't get a phone call returned from the post office, let alone the government. So this is what I'm saying, this is terrible. It was terrible. Anyway, that was off, and people were saying, well, you can forget about that for the next couple of generations. But now that's back on the table. You would have seen when he spoke at the Shangri-La conference earlier in the year in Singapore, Emmanuel Macron talked about the European Union seeking to work more closely with the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which Australia is part of. I mean, that in itself is a good example.
That is a good example.
I'll just give that as a little snapshot. So Trans-Pacific Partnership was a goal to have, it was a big agenda of the Obama administration. It was a goal to have 12 Pacific nations, including the US, Canada, Mexico, Japan, Australia, and the number of others, Singapore, New Zealand. I won't go through the whole list. But in a very ambitious free trade agreement, a very modern free trade agreement. And, Obama regarded this as the single biggest part of his pivot to Asia. And then Trump came in and he pulled out of it. And everybody thought the deal was dead. When everyone did, I didn't, and notoriously, I remember Bill Shorten gave a speech to the press club and said I was engaging in a vanity exercise, trying to keep it alive. And actually, it was a dinner at our house in January 2017. Lucy and I had dinner with Shinzo Abe and his wife Akie, and we talked through this. And Shinzo was initially very, very reluctant. When I say he was very reluctant, he felt the deal was dead too. And we persuaded him that we should keep it going. And I kept on saying, look, the Americans are out of the room. They stepped out of the room. That means they're out of the deal. So we just keep it going. And he was worried to defend Trump. Persuaded him that I persuaded him, one, it wouldn't, and B, it didn't matter if it did. And we kept the deal going. And so it ended up getting we lost one member and acquired 2 superfluous adjectives, so it's now called the Comprehensive and Progressive Trans-Pacific Partnership. So, which was inserted at the request of the Canadians, who then pulled out and then came back at the end. Anyway, it was all these things are all, you know, it's any deal. They're always hard. Anyway, finally got there. But the CPTPP was an example of middle powers, if you like, or non-superpowers, working together with shared values without US leadership. And that was, that seemed like a wild idea at the beginning, but it's happened there. The UK has now joined it, and there are quite a few other countries that want to join it too. And so I think what we have to do is do more of that and just keep going and just accept. We're not, I'm not being anti-American, quite the contrary. I have a lot of affection for the United States and its people, and I'm sorry that their administration is taking them down the paths they're currently going down, but that doesn't mean we have to follow them, right? So what we've got to do is stick to our guns and our values and have our own independent foreign policy, but we have to work with other like-minded countries. And this is, again, the importance. I mean, Luce and I were talking about this earlier today. I used to often say, we should not look at our security as being a series of spokes going into the imperial hubs of Washington or Beijing. We've got to look at our security as a mesh. In other words, working with countries, particularly in our region, and building up stronger relationships and greater levels of trust so that we are collaborating, working together. That's critical, and that's what we need to be doing more of. And I think the government's, if Penny Wong was here, she'd say she agrees with all that, but I'm not sure, there are parts of the government policy that are clearly at odds with it.
Yeah, I think that's true. There's a Horizon Europe initiative which is on at the moment, which is a massive European pool for health and medical research, which we have had the opportunity to join and we've chosen not to.
Yeah.
To date, there's an inquiry that's ongoing at the moment as to whether or not we should, but we could have done that previously and have chosen not to, which is very disappointing for medical researchers and I think a lot of innovators and biotech people. So just before we get to the questions, we've got a number of questions that people have submitted from the audience. Just one other thing. Foreign interference in Australia remains a concern. I think many of us suspect that we're not well protected from it. What would be your position? In 2017, you introduced the Espionage and Foreign Interference Bill.
Yeah.
How do you think we've gone with protecting ourselves and from cybersecurity and other insults since then?
Well, I mean, they're related. I mean, what we did at the end of 2017 introduced legislation about foreign interference and really seeking to prohibit coercive and corrupt interference, right? And our espionage laws were very out of date. They hadn't basically been looked at since the Cold War, if as late as that. And we also had foreign influence legislation, which was designed for people to ensure that particularly people associated with government, being transparent when they are working for or receiving money from foreign governments or foreign political parties. How have the laws been? I think the foreign influence laws have been imperfectly implemented. There was a Senate inquiry looked into it. I think the execution of the law has not been as effective as it should have been. In terms of foreign interference, I think the agencies have been doing a pretty good job there. It's always hard to measure the outcome of these things because your success is something
It's
not
a
happening.
negative, yeah, sure.
In terms of cybersecurity, that is a continuing challenge, right? My government introduced the first national cybersecurity strategy, and there have been several since. But that is particularly the advantage that AI brings to both to the adversaries and to the defence. It is a constant challenge. So just relentless vigilance. Your adversaries are just as ingenious as your people are, and there is absolutely no place for set and forget. So you have to be on your toes all the time.
Great. We'll move on to questions. A question from Anonymous. There are quite a few Anonymouses. Anonymi. If you were PM today,
Yes.
Are there any changes you would make to improve the balance of taxation between labour and wealth in Australia?
Yes. I mean, I did make some changes there when I was PM. Some changes to the superannuation tax concessions. Some of you may remember. Some of you may not entirely forgive me for them. I don't know. In 2016. So we rolled back some of those concessions. I mean, I think our tax system certainly is skewed very much in favour of people with assets and savings, and imposes high rates of tax on people that are, starting to climb up the ladder, earning income. So I think it's the problem is how to do it. I mean, I'll tell you the melancholy reality about tax reform. I mean, there's basically a chapter about this in my memoir. If you could probably find a copy in, sort of a disposal sale for 40 cents nowadays. But essentially the problem is an old tax is a good tax. Change is always unpopular, almost invariably. And it's got to be managed very, very carefully. But yes, I do think if you're starting with a clean slate, which you never are, Monique, you wouldn't have as much concessions built into, superannuation. I mean, you can see the Labor government's seeking to make some changes there. But getting it right, and of course the problem is you create a tax concession and it then becomes capitalised, and you get vested interest. So doing it right. It's easy for the professors at the university to say, you should abolish stamp duty and do this and do that and have a flat tax, consumption tax, and all of that's great. And that's great for the lecture room. But when you're actually in the practical business of doing it, and you're trying to look at winners and losers and how you are fair to people that have changed their affairs to take advantage of tax laws, you've got to, you can't live your life backwards, as a wise person once said to me, and so you've got to, you are where you are. So, but yes, I think the balance isn't quite right, but getting the changes are challenging.
Thank you. Ross has asked, how have your views on climate change as a policy priority changed since your time as PM? Looking back, is there anything you'd do differently on this issue?
Well, my views haven't changed. Things I would do differently. Well, I wish we could have got the emissions trading scheme through the Senate at the end of 2009, but we can thank the Greens for thwarting that. So just never forget that. And there's, You know, there are a number of even though I'd been rolled as leader of the Liberal Party by Abbott at that point, there are a number of Liberals who, you know, were of my persuasion who voted for it in the Senate, but the Greens voted against it. They voted with Tony Abbott. Just think about that. So anyway, you know.
But they're never allowed to forget it, if that's any, any consolation.
They should never be allowed to forget it, because I tell you, if that had gone through, that was back in the days when Angus Taylor when he was a young economist working for Rod Sims, used to say the only way to efficiently cut emissions in Australia is with an economy-wide price on carbon, you know, but he chooses to forget that. If it had been introduced then, it would by now be about as controversial as the GST, you know, just be part of the fiscal furniture. So anyway, look, I think, I mean, there's a lot of things I wish we could have got done that we didn't get done. I mean, the National Energy Guarantee, for example, obviously, you know, caused the, you know, implosion that sort of brought my leadership to an end eventually. But I think the energy transition, clean energy transition, is going fairly well. I'll tell you what this is what the big change is. Back in 2007, when I was John Howard's Environment Minister, and when it was the policy of the Howard government to have an emissions trading scheme. You know, when you think about how the politics of the Liberal Party have changed, just think about that. In 2007, John Howard, that arch-conservative, went to the election with an emissions trading scheme as his policy. It wasn't just his policy, we had actually started legislating it. The first legislation for the emissions trading scheme was introduced into the House of Representatives by me as his Environment Minister, and it's the law. This is the Greenhouse Gas Reporting Scheme. That's still there. So this is how much, you know, this is how how insane it has been. But the thing that at that point, renewables were more expensive than fossil fuels. They're very, you know, not you argue by how much, but the question was, how much are we prepared to pay to save the planet? That was the question. Now, the cheapest form of new generation, regardless of the carbon impact, forgetting about a carbon price, is solar followed by wind with storage. There's no question about that. I mean, that's a fact. And so that is why no one would build a new coal-fired power station in Australia today, other than Barnaby Joyce and Pauline Hanson, perhaps. But you know, and I mean, maybe half the Liberal Party, I don't know, but it would literally be, it wouldn't make any sense at all. And so we've got the tools to get to a zero-emission energy future. We really do. And it is a combination of solar, wind, batteries, pumped hydro, a bit of gas for, you know, to, you know, support peaking at, you know, in times of, you know, when there's a lack of renewable generation. But essentially, that's the mixture. I mean, there was Dennis Barnes, who's the CEO of Snowy Hydro, did a webinar earlier this week, and he, you know, talks about Snowy and Snowy 2, and he explains this. He's a really blunt Mancunian, I can tell you. He's an engineer. He's not a given to ideology or idiocy, but and he makes exactly these points. So yeah, I think now, to be honest, the challenge should be easier. This is the sheer and utter madness of the politics of it. The economics and the engineering have never been more straightforward. You know, renewables are cheaper. And this is the problem that the coalition has. They're going out there demonising renewables, and you've got nearly 40% of Australians have solar panels on their roofs. I mean, and why are they having it there? What are all these people doing that because it makes their electricity bills higher? I don't think so. So, anyway.
But having said that, many, you know, the polls in the last few weeks have suggested that many people are not that convinced about the transition. And I think that many of us have had a great frustration with the fact that the government has failed to communicate the extent to which the transition has progressed.
Yeah,
and there's been a lot of pushback about some of the delays that we've seen, but also around the social licence of that transition. And I think many of us would feel that we're not convincing people as effectively as we could.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest jobs as a political leader is to be an explainer and a persuader, and you've got to give people the facts. I think trust is very important in politics, as it is in everything else, and I think you do build that up with two things: truth, telling the truth, and being transparent about it. So it's not just enough to say, this is, X, Y, Z is the facts. You've got to then say, and this is why it is, here are all the numbers. In other words, you've got to be able to produce the footnotes. I won't go on, but I've had plenty of experience of that in politics, and I think once people know that you are prepared to do that, then they'll trust you. I think the government needs to do, they need to do a better job. I mean, it's at explaining it, and I think, look, I'm sure they're trying very hard, and I'm not trying to be hypercritical, but you're right. And of course, you've got to explain it, and you can't. There's no point saying to someone who says, I believe nuclear power is cheaper because I saw something on YouTube, you're a moron for watching that and believing it. You've got to actually then say, okay, here's the evidence, and just lay that evidence out, and it's pretty compelling. Or people that say, we should get some of those small modular reactors. You go, okay, they're true. There aren't any.
There were.
They aren't any, right? They don't exist. I mean, that'd be. It's so you've got to. Unfortunately, I'll give you an example of the sort of stupidity that you get, and this is where I think to some extent the media, it's the worst thing to do is criticise the media. It's not. I mean, it's an easy. People do that, blame the media for everything, and I don't do that. But let give you an example. In the last election, Dutton used to say, "We need nuclear power to firm renewables." So he was trying to make nuclear power sound friendly towards renewables. Now, a nuclear power station runs all the time. I mean, you can't turn it on and turn it off, for example. Even it's challenging to ramp it up and down. You might be able to, lower production somewhat and raise it a bit, but that's not ideal. I mean, the ideal way to run any, equipment like that, any infrastructure like that, is to have, maximum capacity utilisation. So if it's a 1,000 megawatt plant, to run it like that continuously. So that's why, when nuclear power plants were first built, pumped hydro became a feature, and you see this in Northern Hemisphere, in the US and Europe in particular, and Japan, where you'd have a nuclear power plant, say, that's running at 1,000 megawatts or 1,500 megawatts, and you'd have a pumped hydro project nearby, so that at night, when demand was low, you'd use the surplus electricity to pump water to the top of the hill, and then the hydro plant would be used as the peaking plant during the day. And that's because it was made more sense to keep it running all the time. So if you want to complement renewables like solar and wind that are not running all the time, what you need is something that ideally that can store surplus energy at times when there's more than you need, such as a windy night or a very sunny day, and then send it back into the grid, when it's in demand, or at least something like a gas peaker that you can turn on and off. But the last thing you need is something that runs all the time. So what Dutton was saying was complete nonsense. Even leaving aside the economics of nuclear, it was complete nonsense. But he was hardly ever challenged about it. And this is part of the problem. So, I guess, we've all got to try and do our best. And, you guys do a good job in Parliament doing that, but it's very important.
That would have been quite a long tweet.
Well, exactly, that's right. I have tweeted that more briefly, yeah.
What do we do about disinformation?
Well, I think you've got to counter it. Again, I can give you, I've had this experience. You may remember in the 2016 election, the Labor Party were running a scare called Mediscare, saying that the government was going to sell Medicare, which of course you couldn't sell Medicare. It's nonsense. Someone said to me, it's like saying you'd sell the Sydney Harbour Bridge. Well, the reality is you could sell the Sydney Harbour Bridge. It's a thing, but you couldn't sell. Anyway, and it was nonsense, right? It was a scare campaign. It was targeted at people who were older, poorer, and less informed. It was very cynical. The conventional view at the time was when people are saying outrageously crazy and obviously untrue things, don't spend too much time refuting them because you give them oxygen, okay? That is absolutely wrong. And it was a very expensive mistake for us in not taking a different route. What you have to do, and we did change our position, say, in some of those by-elections, but what you've got to do nowadays in this viral media age, particularly when people can be communicated with directly digitally, you've got to have a whack-a-mole approach. So the way to deal with disinformation is to correct it. So if somebody says, the Prime Minister has two heads, say, no, he does not. He has one head. Here is a picture of him with one head, And, you've just, there is no allegation or conspiracy theory so crazy that you should not absolutely smash it down like a whack-a-mole. I regret, it's crazy that I'm saying this, crazy that I have to say this, but that's, I think, the nature of the digital age we live in.
Yeah, it's interesting. I and many of the other independents were, in the last federal election, constantly up against accusations of always voting with the Greens or being Greens. And, the advice we were given is that if you never wrestle a pig because you end up both covered in mud and the pig likes it. And so there was this constant, do we get down and dirty and take this on and argue about it and take it on and fight it, when it's not that easy to do, and you end up not talking about the things that you really wish you could be talking about.
Well, I think, but I don't think you don't want to spend too much time on it, but I think what you'd need to do is make sure every time that is posted there is a comment correcting it and putting, providing what, the pithy answer, not, the Monique Ryan pithy answer rather than the Malcolm Turnbull wordy answer. Just make sure you knock it back because you see people we used to live in a world where we all shared more or less the same facts. Where we watched the same media, newspapers, television, radio, etc. Nowadays, far too many people, I suspect now increasingly, arguably most people, are living in sort of little information bubbles or silos. And and that is, reaching them is very difficult. And that's why you've got to do everything. That's why you've got to do, if you're in politics nowadays, you've got to do all the social media, you've got to do podcasts, you've got to be out on every platform. You can't just sort of stand up in the Senate courtyard and call a press conference and, talk to the assembled media for the nightly news because, hardly anyone's watching that anymore. Yeah.
We've got about 15 minutes left. I'm going to give you yes or no answers, but I know questions,
Okay.
but I know I
I'll
won't
try
get yes or no answers.
Okay, all right.
Should we allow younger people to vote, i.e. lower the voting age to 16?
Look, I'd say no, but that's a sort of a rather weak no. I'd be interested in hearing the argument for it. If the UK are going to do it, I think it'd be very good to see how that goes. I'd be inclined. If I was Prime Minister today, I'd be inclined to say I've got an open mind on it, but since the UK have just legislated for it, why don't we see how it goes there?
Okay. I've got a private member's bill to say that we should. We could
Okay,
talk about
well,
that
I
sometime.
wouldn't. I mean, I'm not saying it's.
There's actually,
I'm
I
not
think there's
against
good
it.
evidence for
Yeah,
it.
yeah,
We should,
good.
okay,
Well,
we can cover that.
you've thought about it more than I have.
Okay. Should we have a larger parliament? On the grounds that...
Look,
yeah.
I would say yes, but as you know, so I'd say yes, but the problem is the nexus, which requires the Senate be as nearly as practicable 50% of the size of the House. And so that's people are concerned about. I mean, if we keep increasing the size of the Senate, I mean, will there be anybody left in Tasmania who is not a member of the federal parliament? So, I mean, we don't want to be involved in depopulation, every time Parliament sits. But no, so I think that's that. I mean, it'd be good if there was a referendum to remove the nexus once, which has failed, like most referendums do. But what do you think about increasing the size of the parliament?
Well, the number of constituents per electorate has almost doubled since we had a significant
sure. No, they're good. They're very good arguments for it.
Yes, and so someone on the crossbench, we want more people on the crossbench so we can divorce ourselves from Barnaby.
Oh yes, that's
There's an immediate
right.
argument about who has to sit next to him.
Who's going to pull? Who's going? Oh dear. Well, you see, here's an argument for not increasing the size of the parliament, because there are a few spare seats there, so you could actually give him 2 seats to himself. And if you thought David Rowe's depiction of him was anything approximating reality, he'll need at least 2. But if it was a full house, you mightn't have any choice. One of you would have to. Maybe you could sit next to Bob Catter. They could sort of...
Terrifying.
They could sort of... That would be, they could compare hats.
Yeah. I ain't losing any sleep over that one. Fixed terms. 4-year fixed terms.
Definitely. Yeah. Definitely, yeah. No, absolutely, yeah. I mean, I just say the reservation people have had about fixed terms are saying, well, does that mean senators get 8 years? Look, I guess it does. I mean, unless you were going to have the whole Senate going up every time, which I wouldn't have a problem with either. But if you're going to still have half the Senate going up every election, you have 8-year terms. We have 8-year terms in the Legislative Council in New South Wales. I think it's too long, but fixed terms definitely a much better idea. I mean, the federal parliament's the only parliament in Australia, I'm pretty sure, that doesn't have a fixed term.
What about the fact, I mean, there are certain people who end up in the Senate who, are elected for a party, and or even in the House, end up elected as a representative of a party, probably wouldn't have got there had they not had that party's name attached to them, but who then get to sit in the Senate for 6 years. 6
years, yeah.
As an nominal independent, who many people feel that they're being a bit duped. I voted for...
Well, yeah, sure, and they have been. Look, I don't know what you want your parliamentarians to vote, I want them to vote according to their conscience.
If they have one.
Well, I think let's assume they all do. But I think, and you want them to vote, ideally you want them to use independent judgment, not, always vote at their party's call with, etc. So, I think that's just part of the system you've just got to accept. But no, I wouldn't change that.
Okay. How Republic or no Republic?
Well, I'm a Republican, of course.
Yeah, of course. Okay.
Yes.
So on that, how do we have more referenda?
How do we what?
Well, many people.
How do we win? How do we become a republic?
Get it across?
Okay, right.
Yeah.
Well, I've given this a bit more thought than I've given 16-year-olds voting. Look, I think it's very clear that what we need to do is, firstly, we need to have a plebiscite, a non-binding national vote on how we elect the president. We've got to separate. We cannot see what happened in '99 again, where you get the debate about the mode of electing the president and whether we should have a republic or not, being confused at the same time. So I think have a proper debate about how you would choose the president, whether it's direct election or parliamentary appointment. I don't think there are any other alternatives. I don't think anyone's going to suggest we, have a raffle or something like that. Well, it's called sortition. The Athenians used to choose some offices, public offices that way, but probably works better in smaller communities than national ones. But yeah, so I think we have that plebiscite, we thrash that issue out, and having decided that, you then say, all right, this is how the president's going to be chosen. Say to the parliament, all right, draft the amendments. I mean, there's a lot of work's been done on that, including work that George Winterton and I did more than 30 years ago now, which was largely reflected in the amendments in '99. And then you have that debate, and then you can, there will still people who will say, oh, we should have a different mode of appointing the president, but the counter will be to say, look, we thrashed that one out and we made a decision. Yeah. So I think that's what you've got to do. You've got to have two votes, basically. Yeah.
Well, do you think it reasonable to have a referendum with every general election? To get people used to to socialise the idea of the fact that our constitution should be a
living document.
A living document.
Yeah. Look, yes, but you've got to work out what you got. Making change. Work out what you want to change. We have there have been referendums that have been passed at elections but they have been ones that have been technical and non-controversial, like introducing a retirement age of 70 for federal judges, which actually I think was probably a mistake. It should have been probably 75, but at least and also the territorial senators and the way of filling casual vacancies and so forth. But but the problem is if you've got a contentious referendum issue, so let's say you've got one which is contentious, if you have it at the same time as a general election, one side of politics will support it and the others will inevitably oppose it, which means it's got no chance of getting up. So I think if you want the referendums to be successful, and there's genuine contention about it, it really should be a separate event. If, on the other hand, like let's say everyone in the parliament said we're in favour of 4-year terms, the opposition, the government, the crossbench, Greens, everyone said we're all in favour of it, and there was hardly anyone opposed to it, then you might put it up at an election. And so every how to vote would be different, would say, vote, one Labor or one Liberal or one Independent, but then everyone would say vote yes in the referendum. So I think that's the only time I'd have it at an election.
Thank you. We've only got a few minutes left, so I thought that I might ask
Time has flown.
Oh, good.
At least for me, anyway.
Yeah, me too. We haven't talked much about intergenerational inequity, but we do have some young people in the audience this evening, and I think many of us fear that in a time where housing has become increasingly unaffordable for young Australians, where the cost of living crisis has hit pretty hard, particularly young people and younger families in the last few years, and where we have a polity which is struggling to deal with the climate crisis as well, that many young people feel a bit disenfranchised and a bit hopeless about politics in particular and about their representatives. And so I thought I would ask you to give the young people, and there's quite a few of them actually, it was one of the really lovely things when we had people asking for tickets. We had people saying, look, I'll be finished my Year 12 exams that week. And I'd really love to be here. And I want to give a shout out to those young people who are here because it's wonderful to see.
Well, look, the advice I would give them is get involved. Get active, get politically involved. I'm not saying which party or independent or group to get involved with, but be active. I mean, Monique's, but here she is, Monique. That's one answer. But I think look, politics. I mean, Albo gave a very generous speech at the unveiling or public hanging yesterday, and he quoted something I'd said in my maiden speech when I was first elected to Parliament, which I had forgotten that I'd said, but it's something I really have always believed in practice. I said that I believed that politics was not a spectator sport. It wasn't like, football where, the players are the people on the field and everyone else is applauding or booing or, cheering. We are all participants, and so I really believe in active citizenship. So my message to young people, old people, people in the middle, all people, is get involved. I remember during the Republican campaign, I gave a speech to the New South Wales Bar Association. I was just going around, some of you, I'm sure, were involved in the Republican campaign. Some of you probably heard me. We were at some of those speeches. I did a lot of talking. And there was a barrister who stood up during the course of this discussion, and he said, "I'm proud to say I've never been a member of any political party." And I thought to myself, I can understand someone saying, "I've never been a member of a political party," but why would you be proud of that? Why would you be proud? Why? I mean, and he was essentially saying, I'm not involved in politics. Well, of course, you don't have to be a member of a political party to be involved in politics. We all have a vested interest in it, and honestly, the thing that the thing that young people have got is that this is their it's our country, but they have got this huge vested interest in the future, and everything we should be doing, those of us who are in Parliament like you or were in Parliament, is making sure that the country is a better place for them to grow up in, and the best way for them to ensure that that is happening is to get involved. So I'd say get active.
Malcolm Turnbull, thank you for coming to Kooyong. It's been wonderful.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Thank you.